Hello, my name is Tadas Vinokur. Welcome to Flickr Theory Reviews. What is neoliberalism? How does neoliberalism affect the quality of our democracies? Why is peanut butter so freaking delicious? Today, I will answer the first two of these questions by looking at Bonnie Honig's book called Public Things, Democracy in Disrepair. Welcome to my studio.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing.
You now may be wondering, who is Bonnie Honig? Well, she's a famous political, feminist, and legal theorist specializing in democratic theory. She's a media and political science professor at Brown University. Bonnie Honig is most famous for her book Political Theory and the Displacement of Politics, where she argues for contestatory or agonistic approach to democratic participation. Well, what is agonistic politics? Bonnie Honig argues that true democracy requires a contestatory approach from its citizens. That is to say, when dealing with state institutions, law authorities, community leaders, or other cultural norms such as gender, people should not be afraid to challenge, to provoke, to contest the established state of affairs. Bonnie Honig writes, "To engage with authorities, we must approach them genealogically, switch perspectives, occupy unfamiliar positions, use strange languages, forge uncomfortable alliances." In other words, agonistic politics maintains that true democracy is generated when people are actively contesting, debating, provoking the established state of affairs. This way, democracy becomes more dynamic. It constantly renews itself. Bonnie Honig thinks that the belief in right, perfect, impeccable laws that can someday free us from the responsibility, the burden of politics is a pure fantasy. This will simply never happen. All institutions are bound to be imperfect. Honig's response to this issue, however, is not nihilistic, like some people's, but radically democratic. That is, she wants people to actively participate in the struggle for better laws, better institutions, and better cultural norms. The emphasis here falls on better, not perfect. One has to, according to Honig, accept and embrace the perpetuity of contest within politics.
What do you think about this proposal? I disagree. Well, I disagree with your proposal. I see where you're coming from, but I think your proposal is ridiculous and stupid. Right, well, I think you are making a big mistake. Be that as it may, I think you're stupid and your proposal is stupid. Well, I respectfully disagree. Ditto.
However, active participation in politics can be easily undermined by undemocratic policies, large business lobbying, or deep-seated cultural norms. Moreover, some people simply don't have the means or the time to engage in perpetual political struggle for better democracy. For this reason, Bonnie Honig in her book Public Things discusses the reasons why democratic politics could be undermined today. She thinks that neoliberalism presents a unique challenge to agonistic politics in that it emphasizes absolute economic freedom, which comes at the expense of democratic participation and social cohesion. Well, how does neoliberalism impact democratic politics? Firstly, we should clearly define what we mean by neoliberalism. Neoliberalism refers to the resurgence of liberal free market ideology in the 1980s, following the post-war period of Keynesian consensus. Simply put, during the post-war period, countries relied more on state-funded initiatives for economic and social progress. In the 1980s, however, such policymakers as Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, inspired by economists like Milton Friedman, moved away from state-sponsored social spending by privatizing large chunks of publicly owned institutions. So, when people discuss neoliberalism, they usually refer to policies that include economic liberalization, privatization of state institutions, deregulation of economy, and most importantly, reduction in government spending. All of this can be perfectly summed up by Milton Friedman's quote, "The government solution to a problem is usually as bad as the problem."
I just came up with a really good idea. Should we do it?
Really?
No
way,
way,
Jose.
Jose.
No.
I don't want to.
No way, Jose.
That's a terrible idea.
I hate
No,
the
no
government.
way.
I hate the
That's
government.
the worst
I hate
idea.
the
I really don't
government.
think
I disagree.
No.
I don't like the
No,
government.
Neoliberalism is essentially the belief that the logic of free market economy can provide us with the best products and services, thus ensuring overall better quality of life. However, many popular political movements today, especially those on the left side of political spectrum, they critique this neoliberal logic by citing immense economic stratification, terrible outcomes of austerity measures, financial crisis of 2007-2008, decaying quality of social services, rising cost of education, global environmental crisis, the rise of Donald Trump, alt-right, resurgent child poverty, offshoring of wealth, epidemic of loneliness, so on, and so on. Today, however, I will not be discussing in detail the specific socioeconomic issues that are sometimes associated with neoliberalism. Instead, I want to look at how does neoliberalism impact the politics of democratic struggle. Well, Bonnie Honig, in her book Public Things, claims that citizenship is undone by neoliberalism's unremitting calculations of instrumental worth and its incapacity to imagine a world-building project that is not entrepreneurial by nature. That is to say, Bonnie Honig thinks that neoliberalism hollows out democratic principles by treating people as a resource to be invested in for future profits, not as subjects of innate integrity. In her book Public Things, Bonnie Honig draws quite a bit on Wendy Brown's critique of neoliberalism. Wendy Brown, a famous American political theorist, argues that within neoliberalism, all spheres of existence are framed and measured by economic terms and metrics, even when those spheres are not directly monetized. For Wendy Brown, neoliberalism thus turns people into homo economicus, that is, a type of a human being that is an instrument, an extension of the market. In other words, the worth of a homo economicus is always equal to the market value of his or her skills. Moreover, Wendy Brown claims that all pillars that make up a functional democracy, such as the practice of law, popular sovereignty, equal participation, education, public goods and services, are being eroded by way of neoliberal privatization and economization. Therefore, laws or education in a neoliberal system are only as good as their capacity to serve the requirements of the market. For Bonnie Honig, all of this means that neoliberalism erodes what she considers to be public things. Now, what is a public thing? Bonnie Honig does not give us a simple description of a public thing. However, she does give us some examples of public things, such as universities, roads, transportation links, governments, parks, libraries. Well, you know what? I'm just gonna show it to you guys. Public things,
Public things, public things, public things, public things, public things, public things, public things, public things, public things, public things, public things, public things.
Well, this one's a doozy. European democracy materialized. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can rub your body against it.
Public things, 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 public things.
A public thing, for Bonnie Honig, is an object that is subject to public oversight, even if it is not publicly owned. Most importantly, for Bonnie Honig, public things function like a set of common points of reference within a democracy. Honig says that democracy is rooted in a common love for, antipathy to, and contestation of public things. Public things remind us that we have something in common. We exchange democratic values by learning to share and contest public things. By negotiating the design of public institutions, public spaces, and other public objects, we actively engage in the making of a democracy. The problem is, however, that neoliberalism erodes the value of public things by using them purely for profit.
So let's take public education in the United States. Public education for Bonnie Honig is a perfect example of a public thing gone wrong. In the 1980s, average college tuition in a public university was around $2,000. Right now it is 4 times that amount. This basically means for Bonnie Honig that neoliberalism doesn't treat public universities, public education, as a good investment for future profits. Bonnie Honig writes, "Neoliberalism cultivates hostility to anything that is not clearly instrumental, profitable, and practical from the perspective of late capitalism."
Why are public things so important to a democratic society? Bonnie Honig uses psychoanalytic object relations theory to emphasize the significance of a public thing. Donald Winnicott, a famous British psychoanalyst and object relations theorist, argued that babies require a transitional object in order to gain independence from their mothers. That is to say, by playing with a toy car, a doll, or a blanket, the baby is, for the first time, able to engage creatively with the external world without the help of his or her mother. The baby, by way of an object, strengthens his or her sense of self.
For Bonnie Honig, public things function similarly to Winnicott's transitional object, in that public things allow citizens to collect themselves, to self-reflect. In other words, by way of public objects or public things, people consolidate a shared narrative of objects, an infrastructure of shared democracy, if you will. By contesting and designing public objects or public things, citizens can solidify social cohesion and increase democratic participation. By realizing the great power of public things, we can strengthen the object relations of a democratic collectivity. However, neoliberalism, according to Bonnie Honig, undermines the innate significance of a public thing by treating it as a run-of-the-mill commodity, and thus it undermines the lived experience of our democracy.
The most important attribute of a public thing is that it is created by way of democratic participation. Therefore, some public objects can be quite useless and silly. However, a public object nonetheless serves an extremely important purpose. It valorizes different people's perspectives within the infrastructure of democracy. A public object can tell us something extremely important about our way of life. In this case, perhaps, that we have a secret desire to urinate in the streets while naked. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.
You should subscribe to my channel. You should subscribe. Please don't forget to subscribe.